Well, hello, everyone. My name is Sherry Kimes, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today for a session on Deja Vu All Over Again, Lessons from the Hotel Industry. I've got two incredible panelists with me today. I've got Bill Carroll, one of my former colleagues from the hotel school, who is he's a master of everything, shall we say. And I've also got Ashwin Kamlani, who's a former student who's gone on to do fantastic things in both the hotel and restaurant world. And we're hoping today to talk about some of the lessons that could be learned from the hotel industry, but also some of the differences and some things that restaurant operators should be aware of to make sure that they don't do the same kind of mistakes. And so first of all, Bill and Ashwin, can you briefly introduce yourself? Bill, let's start off with you.
Thanks, Sherry. Deja vu, I'm old enough to know deja vu. And so my background is I worked almost 15 years with Hertz Rent-A-Car in the area of online marketing, distribution, revenue management, and pricing. And then I also worked at Cornell, and I taught courses in pricing and digital marketing over time. And currently, I'm author of a number of articles, and I work with a company called Focusrite, which is effectively a company that studies the travel industry with regard to the digital marketplace.
Hey, and Ashwin?
So Ashwin Kamlani, first of all, Bill, Sherry, it's so great to see you both, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this. My background is I started out in Accenture and PricewaterhouseCoopers with technology, and then did my master's at the Cornell Hotel School. While I was doing my master's, I interned with a large Spanish hotel chain called Melia, grew to become their global head of e-commerce and distribution, and then went on to start my own company called Regatta Travel Solutions and helping hotels with their own distribution. Now I'm the founder and CEO of a company, co-founder and CEO of a company called Juicer, and we are focused on restaurants. We are using multiple data sources and intelligence to help restaurants create real-time demand forecasts for the purposes of precision pricing, which means accurate pricing per item, per channel, per hour. The interesting thing and why I decided that it was the right time to join a company that was in the restaurant space was that when I joined the master's program at Cornell, it was September 2001. And if you remember back to September 2001, you remember what happened. And it was 9/11 happened within the first week that I was in school. And while I was interning with Melia, it became quite clear that the entire industry was in chaos, revenues were plummeting. But there was this massive revolution happening at the same time in the industry, right? The rise of third-party intermediaries, digital channels, and what I experienced firsthand was the entire industry being overwhelmed with all these new digital channels, rapid technological innovation. How do we figure out how we're going to manage all these channels? I remember at Melia, we had teams of people working all these different extranets individually. And also the threat or worry of losing control of the customer and having an intermediary get between the hotel and its own customer. And so now when you look at what's happening in the restaurant industry with COVID, it looks like it's exactly the same thing. Suddenly, depending on third-party intermediaries, losing access to that first-party customer, high commissions associated with those channels. And so, look, I think the benefit of what this discussion can bring today is that the hotel industry learned a tremendous amount over the last 20 years. And I think we can all have an interesting discussion here today about what are the similarities, what are the differences, and what are some of the lessons learned.
And I think one of the key things is we want to come up, what are the lessons learned so that people don't go through and make the same sorts of mistakes. And so Bill, I mean, Ashwin was talking about what it was like back then. I mean, what was going on with hotel distribution, and what did you, how did it, how did it evolve, and what sorts of issues sort of started to come up?
Absolutely, and Ashwin, thank you. That was a great lead-in. In fact, there are four big areas that I think are important. One is lodging booking, and for that matter, travel booking, moved online. From the time it started prior to 2001, it was less than 3%. Now it's 40, 50%, depending upon the segment, moved online. Second, major online travel companies emerged and became stronger and resilient in the marketplace, and so began to represent 50% of online bookings. Moreover, the major chains, for a variety of reasons, viewed the OTCs as the enemy, and were looking at them And in fact, it signed OTC parity clauses, which said that they couldn't offer lower rates than the OTCs, and subsequently woke up in a sense, and then began to use their loyalty programs, began to use credential access, whether they're loyalty members or their association members or whatever else. And the note that you always get a better deal direct. They woke up. And moreover, for the restaurant industry, it's interesting to note that in the US, roughly 50% of the bookings made online share between the OTCs and the hotels. In Europe, it's 75% for the OTCs versus the hotels, because in large part, the predominance of the chain. So those kinds of things are what occurred.
And I think too, so Ashwin, what sorts of, Bill alluded to some of these things. In terms of, there was the rate parity, there was the loss of customer data. What other sorts of problems did you see when you were working in the hotel distribution side?
Well, one of the major concerns in the hotel industry, which was a real concern and is now a concern in restaurants, is the commoditization that happens, right? So when you have a customer who can go to a marketplace and simply look through the listings and make their decision more based on sort order and photos and customer reviews and less maybe about which brand they're choosing, that definitely happened in the hotel industry. And I think now the same is happening in restaurants, where the customer would have a specific pizza place that they would always go to, or a specific burger place they would always go to. Now, when they go to Uber Eats or DoorDash, it's, well, let me just flip through the pictures and which one catches my eye. And by the way, what's the wait time? That's going to be a major factor in my decision, aside from just price. But definitely, I think commoditization is one of the challenges that are facing both the industries.
And the commoditization, because I remember that so much. Actually, I remember the first time I was at a conference, and it must have, where they were started talking. It was the first time I'd heard the term OTA, and a couple of people and I kind of exchanged looks like, what? But there was this fear. There was this real fear about the commoditization. They're just going to treat me like anybody else, and there was the fear, and actually it became true, right? And I think with for Bill, what did the hotel industry do? What are some of the things that they did wrong? And then we're going to kind of transition from what they did wrong. And Ashwin, I'll ask you the opposite. What did they do right? And then let's move into the restaurant side. What did the hotel industry do wrong, Bill?
Two things, I think. The first is to really understand the role of the online travel company, in the sense that, unlike the dining industry, travel industry, OTCs were in a position to help assist with the travel experience from end to end, from when you leave the house till you get back. Individual suppliers were not. And recognizing that significant role and place in the marketplace. Second is they didn't understand the value, costs versus ultimate return from the use of online travel companies and their roles. Those two items, not recognizing the experience, and second of all, not digging in and understanding what the value proposition is for the OTCs. And when they did that, treating them like the enemy, they may have spent significantly more money than they needed to or should have with regard to trying to drive direct campaigns.
And let's talk about the enemy. I remember this was a study I did about 10 years ago, and it was on asking people, revenue management people, what do you think revenue management is going to look like 5 years from now? And I had some statisticians from SAS who were analyzing the open-ended questions, and they didn't know anything about the travel industry. And we set up a conference call after they'd done their analysis. And they said, the first question they asked me, they said, who are these OTAs? People really hate them. And when I said, okay, you got it. But there was this, why do we have to pay them 25 or 30%? We could have they would have booked with us directly. Let's just cut them off. Gee, sounds kind of familiar to what might be going on with restaurants. Okay, so there's some of the mistakes. So Ashwin, what are some of the things that they did right?
Well, I think over time, once hotels realized, you know what, I cannot silo my third-party distribution. I have to just look at distribution in general. What are the strengths that those third parties bring to the table? Of course, I would love everyone to come directly into my hotel, or in this case, the restaurant, but there is a new reality, and I think it's important to embrace that. One quick, segue I would just make here is I remember the hotels. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to go back to this. So, what I was going to say is that in the OTA world, a lot of hotels figured out how to embrace the merchandising mechanisms that those OTAs brought to the table and use that to their strengths. And they realized that the OTAs were able to reach broad audiences that they could not do on their own. And that's something that I would really encourage restaurants to do as well. Um, when the OTA started, there was in the hotel industry, there was a lot of concern about the how they treated hotels, the kind of let's say, unfair practices around, I'm going to list your hotel, but if you're sold, if you decide you're going to only give me 2 rooms, I'm going to tell everyone you're sold out. And unfortunately, we've heard some stories in the past about the third parties and restaurants doing that, listing restaurants, even though the restaurant hadn't signed up and things like that. But I think things have changed. And you talk to these third party intermediaries today, like Uber and DoorDash, they really are concerned about the customer experience. And so I think it's important for restaurants to understand that there are a powerful marketplace and they should learn how to use those merchandising mechanisms to their advantage.
Okay, let's switch over and start talking specifically about restaurant distribution, and then we'll kind of keep going back to the hotel experience. I mean, there've been some thought that, well, now that COVID is hopefully starting to go away, those were all hopefully starting. How are those for sort of couching it a little bit? But well, delivery is not going to be as big, or off-premise dining. Well, it had already started to grow pre-COVID. And customers, I mean, they love the convenience. There was a recent study from the National Restaurant Association, and a high percentage of people said it was essential to their lifestyle. And so it's not going to go away. And so, and you see often, like in the hotel industry, many hoteliers were saying, well, this will just go away. Nobody will ever book this way. And you see the same thing in the restaurant industry. And so, depending on the part of the world you're in. So like here in the US, we have DoorDash and Uber Eats and Grubhub to some extent. And, in Southeast Asia, it's Grab and Foodpanda and Deliveroo. So it varies depending on where you are. But Ashwin, I mean, you've seen this. I mean, how has restaurant distribution been evolving, and how have what sorts of similarities and differences do you see?
That's a great question. I mean, so first of all, it's important to remember that the industry has changed quite a lot, right, because of COVID. And restaurants realize that, you know what, maybe I don't need that expensive storefront prime real estate anymore. And so I can start serving food out of a warehouse, or, and just do delivery. And you have the rise of ghost kitchens and virtual brands. And so I remember back in the hotel school, in the master's program, we all said it's about location, location, location. And even when the OTAs came out, the third parties, it was still about location, location, location. Once that customer booked, then ultimately they had the same experience when they walked through that door of that hotel, right? But that's not the same with restaurants. The experience is actually different if you walk into that restaurant, or even if you order for pickup versus ordering through a third party. And that's because I alluded to this in my video on LinkedIn yesterday. These third parties like DoorDash and Uber have to insert themselves into that experience. And they're using a network of gig workers to get that food from the restaurant to the home. So it is a very, very, it's not apples to apples. So I think that's very important to remember in these scenarios.
And I think you make a really important comment there about it's a different experience. And so like in the hotel world, it doesn't matter where you book. I mean, it used to be that they would, like, let's say if you book through Priceline, they might give you a lousier room. I mean, there was that kind of silliness that went on, but essentially you were in your room and it was going to be the same experience. In the restaurant industry, not necessarily, and the loss of control. And Bill, you talk a lot about customer experience. What role do you see this? I mean, you've seen how it has played out in the travel industry. How do you see that playing out in the restaurant world?
Absolutely. And that's the great question. And related, if you will, back to the online travel OTCs, online travel companies, or OTAs, related back. In the travel industry, they have an opportunity, if you will, to control and manage that whole experience, door to door. It's not the same in the dining industry, if you will. the OTC or intermediary role is really one of a marketplace. It's a place for you to participate and to figure out how you're going to operate in this new world. So they're very different roles that the intermediary is playing, and that's significant. And the second thing about the experience is it's more complicated than dining industry. You have a plethora of options, from prepared food that you prepare for yourself to dining out, and a myriad of things in between. And moreover, the suppliers are more independent than most chains are. And frankly, those two factors, plus the notion of it's a marketplace, is a very different role for intermediaries, more complex and difficult to evaluate and operate in.
You know what, Bill?
Go
if
ahead.
you don't mind, I just want to touch on something that Bill brought up, and that was the plethora of options that now exist. You know, in the hotel industry, we didn't see this at first, but over time, we started to see that those options became even more, numerous when you go into booking.com today and there are all these apartments available and bed and breakfast available. And, as people started to try to compete with Airbnb, there was this clutter, if you will, of options. Now that happened much more quickly in the restaurant industry, right? And now when you look at restaurants, you could be choosing from a convenience store, and suddenly the restaurants are competing with 7-Eleven or possibly the Whole Foods down the street. And this was not the case before. So that's definitely an interesting challenge. And the second thing I would say to your point earlier is, in the hotel industry, when the OTAs came out, I remember there were 10 or 20 of them, right? And then suddenly Expedia gobbled up Hotels.com, and then they gobbled up Travelocity, and then they gobbled up, and then you had this massive duopoly. Well, that happened also a lot more quickly in the restaurant space, where yes, Grubhub is still out there fighting the good fight, but essentially it's coming down to DoorDash and Uber Eats. And so that's something that's important for the restaurant industry to realize, is that in the US market, there are these two powerful players and they can't be ignored.
And there are two themes that just came up. One was talking about the service experience, and the other one was about the marketplace. And let's talk about the service experience, because for example, in one of the studies I've done on customer reaction to delivery, if there's a problem with their order, I ask a question: whose fault is it? Who do you blame? They blame the restaurant overwhelmingly. But once the food is picked up from the restaurant doesn't have much control. And so there's that part. And then there's also the part, Ashwin, that you talked about, with ghost kitchens and virtual brands, about having to change your production model. And so in the hotel industry, this is a key difference, I think, that you bring up really well in your video from yesterday, Ashwin, is that they didn't have to change the service experience. Restaurants have had to. And can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, when you go to restaurant conferences, and full disclosure, I'm relatively new to this industry, but I've been learning a ton, since we started this company. But one of the things you quite often hear is how restaurants are actually physically changing the layout of the restaurant to deal with this new reality and the new experience, because you have customers waiting to actually be seated, and then you have DoorDash and Uber delivery drivers coming into the reception area waiting for the food. That makes things uncomfortable. Sometimes for the customer, there's nothing more aggravating than waiting to be seated and seeing them prioritizing, the restaurant prioritizing orders that need to be delivered and things like that. So I think that the concept of ghost kitchens and virtual brands is very important for restaurants to really embrace and understand. One of the things we were talking about earlier in terms of what are the opportunities for restaurants to kind of embrace this new reality and these marketplaces, I think the idea of virtual brands is something that every single restaurant should be looking into. Why is that? Because, if you've built a brand in the restaurant industry for 10, 20 years, and you want to try out a new item, or you want to test out different pricing, then there's a certain fear. Well, how are my customers going to react to that? What if they don't like it? Now, the idea that you can just build a virtual brand and only sell it through delivery, that creates an incredible testing ground to be able to try new items, try different pricing and other things in a geographic market that never existed before. So, look, the challenge is, and we should probably talk about this a little bit, hotels had marketing teams, they had revenue management teams. And then when the OTAs came on board, they came online, these teams had to rethink the way they did business, right? But restaurants, they're lean operations and they're understaffed already. And so the challenge for restaurants today is, how do I deal with all this stuff? How do I know, what technology I need? And I don't even know, who do I assign to investigate these things and figure out how all this works? And so if anyone hasn't read it, I highly recommend reading this book called Delivering the Digital Restaurant, authored by Meredith Sandlin and Carl Orsborn, because I think any restaurant who hasn't read that book is missing out. It clearly explains how all these things work and how they could be taking advantage of these trends.
And I think that the point you raised there is that there are all these different technologies right now. You've got the restaurant industry is a lot more fragmented than the hotel industry, and they're already lean anyway. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, I could do this, I could do that. And then meanwhile, I've got all these delivery companies and they're giving me my tablets that aren't integrated with my POS system. And it's overwhelming. And what tends to happen is that when it becomes overwhelming, people just kind of shut down. They don't know what to do. And I think there's a lot of opportunities here. And what about, and let's talk about the marketplace, because restaurant operators, they hate the commission. Well, the hoteliers, I could tell you, they hate the commission too. But is it a cost or is it an investment?
So I was just going to say, we cannot ignore the economic side of this conversation, right? And I remember when I was working at Melia, what happened was we used to work with wholesalers, and those wholesalers were taking 25 to 30% margins or commissions. And that was understood because they were selling through a network of travel agents. I think what took the industry by surprise was when Expedia bought Travelscape and then started selling directly to the customer with wholesale pricing. And suddenly the hotels were like, wait a minute, there's no travel agent here. They're selling directly to the customer, but they're making 25 to 30% on that. And then before we knew it, they had these gargantuan marketing budgets to dominate meta search and Google and things like that. Now, the restaurant industry operates on much thinner margins, right? So for them to give away 20%, it hurts. They're not used to that. Customers coming directly to the restaurant, those margins weren't there. So you're right. I think the restaurants, it's painful for them, but that, I think, highlights the point even more of how important it is to understand the importance of investing in your first party channel, getting your own website, your digital ordering capability as strong as possible, and then understanding, what the restaurant industry has had this luxury of people walking through the door forever, right? And never really having a good mechanism in place to capture the data on who that customer is. How can I market to that person? How can I build a long-term relationship with that customer? But now it's more important than ever to figure that out.
Sherry, if you don't want to, I'm thinking about my old role as a professor, and the students maybe are listening to this. And I think, well, is it hopeless and all that? No, it's not. One of the things that we've heard in this discussion is perspective. Thinking about the OTAs as a marketplace is a perspective. Get that perspective. The second thing is focusing on the brand and what it is, and what I'm capable of doing, how the market is segmented. That's just thinking smart about the industry. Yes, there may be difficulty getting information. Yes, there may be information tied up in control over the experience. But the starting point is think about the marketplace, think about the intermediary as a marketplace, and think about your brand and what you're going to do. That you can do, and it's not costly.
And as a marketplace, what are things, if you look at it this way, what are the things that restaurants can do to take advantage of this? You're paying 25, 30% depending on the arrangement that you have. But you are also getting marketing, you're getting more exposure. What can an operator do to fully take advantage of the marketplace?
Well, I had a question on LinkedIn yesterday about Google and its role in the hotel industry, and how Google became such an important player for hotels because that was almost the most important way to reach customers. But I would argue that in the restaurant industry, Google doesn't play that role. It's actually Uber Eats and DoorDash. So to your question, I think it's important to understand that. I have my own restaurant group, and I have my way that I can market to those customers. But the next best thing is to figure out how I can take advantage of these marketplaces to reach all of their customers and attract them to my restaurant. So you kind of have to change the way you think about how the restaurant industry works, which can be quite difficult. But you have to realize that there are certain things that people who are shopping in those marketplaces prioritize. And it's great imagery, it's reviews, it's wait times, right? Those are things that now are the primary factors that make decisions around who they're going to order from. And as soon as they order from you, that is your opportunity to start building a relationship with that customer and turn them into a first party customer. Difficult thing to do, I don't deny that, but you have to know what are the technologies out there that can help me. Zach Oates is a great guy. He runs this company called Ovation, and they're doing great things to help restaurants, just even with just the phone number, start to get feedback and start to build relationships with customers. And it's a very easy to use thing. And so I think there are things like that restaurants absolutely have to look at in order to figure out how to leverage that marketplace to attract people and then start retaining them.
Yeah.
And Bill, in the hotel industry, give us some examples of how people have done this well. And you're a digital marketing guy.
Yeah.
I mean,
the advice that I gave in the hospitality industry could be similar to what Ashwin's talking about. One is understand effectively the lifetime value of a given customer and the information and what that's going to generate for you going forward. Think of that as vertical. Now think about that as now think about vertical. Now think about the relationship between a given customer and other customers, either physically or online in some way, where now you expand your customer base. And so thinking about it as an investment for the future, not necessarily a cost, investment versus cost. Second is what you want to think about is what would it cost you to do that? What's the opportunity? I'm an old economist, right? What's the opportunity cost if I didn't have it? And so you break it up in opportunity cost, you break it up in lifetime value of the customer. And I think that translates into the restaurant industry. The difficulty, quite frankly, is capturing the data, which are indicators that you're on track. And I'm going to compliment Ashwin. And the good news is you can make some changes in brand and the world doesn't end. Guess what? You can try stuff.
And I think too, what both of you alluded to, I mean, if it's a marketplace, do what you can. What are the things that you can do to be listed first or to be noticed, to be ordered? And I think one of the things we have not mentioned, which is a real advantage for the restaurant industry, hotel industry in most parts of the world has rate parity.
That's right.
Right.
And so Ash would explain that a little bit for people who haven't heard of that one.
I remember attending conference after conference with very angry people in the hotel industry talking about rate parity, which meant that if you sold a room for $200 on Expedia and you decided you want to sell your room for $195 on your own website, you would get an angry phone call from Expedia saying, no, even though you're going to pay me, 25% commission on that, you have to make sure my price is $195. So the price has to be the same everywhere. And it took years for the hotel industry to kind of win that. Well, in some cases, it's still raging on, but here in Europe, I think that's not allowed anymore.
Exactly.
But now in the restaurant industry, the restaurants won that battle very early on, and that's a huge advantage for restaurants. Yes. However, and this I think this is going to be an interesting point, because while it is an advantage, it's extremely important to use it wisely, right? So as everything we've been saying is, these are powerful marketplaces. It's important to take advantage of them to attract the customer in. So pricing is so important here. And I don't want to plug my own company here, but pricing is extremely important, and it's all about using the right data to make those decisions. So one of the things you can do right is figuring out how to attract people using the right pricing and then converting them into loyal customers. Look at what Domino's did recently to attract people to come in and pick up their order instead of ordering delivery. They said, hey, you know what? We know it's really tough to get that food from the restaurant to your house. And so if you come and pick it up, we'll tip you $3, which I thought was just a brilliant marketing tactic, but they've been successful. And what I heard at the Food on Demand conference in Vegas 2 weeks ago was that pickup orders are actually increasing. And I think that frankly, the third-party intermediaries in the restaurant space are feeling the pinch that they don't have the advantage that Expedia and all the OTAs had about we have the best price and the best deal. So the question is, how much more is the customer willing to pay for that convenience? How far can that go? And how can restaurants understand the data to start using that to their advantage?
Let's talk about data. The restaurant industry has been, what I tell people when they're starting to, in my classes, okay, restaurant people have two things. They hate spending money, but basically they hate spending money, and they're they don't like technology. But right now, there's so many opportunities, the data that you can get, whether from a QR menu or whether you're getting things from credit cards. And quite frankly, most restaurants, other than ones that take reservations, which is a pretty small percentage of restaurants, they don't know their customer. So what about getting data? I mean, what about the investment in digital? Ashwin or Bill, whichever one of you wants to take it.
Well, I'll just jump in and say one thing, which is one thing that concerns me a little bit is the regression to paper menus. And, I think it's easy to do that because the customer says, hey, you know what? I don't want to worry about this COVID thing anymore. Give me my paper menu back. And unfortunately, during COVID, some restaurant groups just took the paper menu and created a PDF. And when you scan the QR code, it was quite uncomfortable to zoom in on different pieces of the menu to try to understand, what it looked like. But there are really good digital and mobile first solutions out there for digital menus. And those provide a much better experience. And those restaurants are still using either the customer's personal device or iPads in the restaurant. Now, why is that important? How does that relate to data? Well, you have a lot more information about who that customer is, how they're ordering, and the trends that are happening when you're still using digital menus, even on site, versus reverting back to paper menus. But I think that's just one element of many that restaurants should be considering in terms of how do I collect more data, how do I understand that data, and how do I make it actionable?
Because then you own the data, which is key.
Right.
Correct.
I want to follow up with what was just said, not owning the data. Two things. First of all, the advantage of a digital world is that you have the opportunity to do real-time, near-time testing of discounting or value or options or so forth that you didn't have before. And so you have the option in that digital world to bring your brand, bring your value proposition, to try it and get test information and data information, for heaven's sake, collect it and analyze it. And we're not talking about a long time. So I think it's an enormous opportunity to get digital, get smart, get savvy, and try things. And particularly relate them to your brand and your segment in the marketplace. I believe it's an enormous opportunity, the digital world.
Bill, to piggyback on what you just said, if we look at the evolution of how hotels dealt with third-party distribution and first-party distribution from 20 years ago until today, in my view, one of the game changers was how hotels have been able to leverage loyalty to strengthen their first-party distribution. And that's something that, as I alluded to earlier, unfortunately, until today, restaurants really haven't paid too much attention to capturing consumer data and figuring out how to use that. But today, as you're saying, I mean, it is so extremely important. And as we get further along in this new world, and it's not going away, folks. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, the digital world is here to stay. Delivery is going to grow. Off-premise is going to grow. And so we have to adapt. But what that means is knowing your customer, capturing more data, using it how to build, to build loyalty is extremely important. And that opens up a tremendous opportunity from a merchandising perspective, from a pricing perspective, with your loyal customer base, if you can figure out how to build that.
Exactly.
And two things here. First of all, audience, if you have questions, please post them. We'd be happy to answer them at the end. And then, Bill, I mean, first party reservations. The hotel industry has done a lot to try to build first party. I mean, come to my website, book direct. Has it been successful, and what's worked and what hasn't worked?
To some extent, if I were to describe it, mildly successful, because the two things, it's not the demand for lodging, it's a demand for a hospitality experience or travel experience. And as long as that's the case, I think there's a limit to how much you can drive direct. And so it's been mildly successful. That said, getting back to what Ashwin said, there's enormous opportunities in the dining and restaurant industry. If you can capture that information and give credentialed access, and by that I mean you've been a loyalty member, you've come to me before, you're a member of some association, there's some reason why you want to book with me. And I can make an argument from a revenue management standpoint that you ordered earlier in the day and you're going to get a better deal. And so you can bring in the key aspects of revenue management and loyalty and credentialed access all together to improve your position currently with revenue management and pricing, and long run with regard to attachment to you going forward. It's a huge opportunity.
I mean, it's a huge opportunity, but there's also the customer from a, why do they go to an OTA or why do they go to a DoorDash? It's really easy and it's really convenient. And so you've got to give them a reason to, it can't be harder for them because why skip that? But there are some real advantages to it, but I think that there's a lot of move right now in the restaurant industry. Let's try to drive first party. I think it'll be the same. I think it's going to be mildly successful. You're not going to be able to get all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have some horrible graphs which show asymptotic. How about that for an old economics professor? And so you meet your limit. That's what it is. There is a limit. And I think that's another lesson to be learned. There's only so far you can go with regard to.
Look, I think COVID was, it can't be stated how challenging COVID was for the restaurant industry. And now we're feeling the aftermath of that with the rise of inflation and labor cost and food cost going up. And so I think it's incumbent upon restaurants to figure out, how they can build those relationships, increase profitability, and not only survive, but become more successful. Now, the fact that COVID is hopefully dissipating and people are coming back into restaurants is a tremendous opportunity to then interact with that customer and start to build that relationship. Let's learn from the past and not assume that there isn't going to be another pandemic next year, right? Let's prepare. And that means building that loyalty program, understanding who that customer is. One of my favorite, my kids, I have two daughters, 9 and 11, and I didn't mention this earlier, but we live in Rome, Italy. Every time we go back to the US, the first thing we do is we go to IHOP. It's like one of our favorite things to do. Now, the last time I went to an IHOP, which was maybe 2 weeks ago in Vegas at Food on Demand, I walked in, sat down, and they handed me a menu, and it had this really great promotion for a new loyalty program that they've just launched. So there are restaurant groups that are realizing this, and they are acting upon it. And so I commend them for launching that type of loyalty program and starting to build that relationship, because it's so important. But then the message to a largely fragmented industry where you have many, many small groups out there and many independent groups out there is do the homework. I know it's tough, but do the homework and figure out who are the technology providers out there that you can actually trust to help you with these things, because we know how understaffed they are. And we also know that, unfortunately, there are a lot of players that have come out and overpromised and under-delivered in the technology world. So ask for help, and I can't state enough how important investing in technology is right now.
I think one of the things that is kind of dangerous right now, and Ashwin, you kind of alluded to that, well, people are going back into the restaurants and reestablishing the experience with the customer. And there's a real danger that an operator could go, oh, well, this delivery off-premise stuff, it's a pain in the rear anyway. And all of a sudden they're not paying any attention to it or hoping it goes away. And they're not paying, but the key thing is they're not paying attention. And the challenging part is that not only do they have their in-house guests, but they also have these others to deal with. And then they're dealing with the labor shortage. And so can they produce enough in their kitchen? So it's a particularly challenging time right now, I think, as restaurant operators seek to kind of balance these out. And how are they going to do that successfully? And I think it's hard. And I think another thing with this too is, like in the hotel industry, capacity is a little bit more, it's very easily defined. It's how many rooms you have. In the restaurant industry, when I ask people that question, well, what's your capacity? It's like, well, and whenever someone says, well, it's like, well, it depends. So I think that's an issue. And one more topic I wanted to talk about before we kind of summarize and go to Q&A. Bill, you mentioned revenue management and pricing. All three of us are revenue management and pricing people. So we have to talk about that. What revenue management opportunities do you see?
Okay. I really see three. The first opportunity goes back to what Ashwin and you were talking about with production. If you are producing dining experiences or dining and branded experiences, how far in advance or how you manage that or how you capture that can improve the efficiency with which you prepare and ultimately deliver. Second, you can use the revenue management tools and the pricing tools to more smooth out, if you will, the timing of demand. So you could do it that way. And the third thing you can do with regard to revenue management is you can actually measure and improve the level of attachment of that customer group to you. Each one of those has value. The one negative about revenue management, I'm sorry about that. You used to teach that at Cornell for years. The one downside is that you don't really have the capability explicitly with a revenue management system to capture the long-term value vertically and horizontally of a customer through for effective revenue management and pricing. That revenue management doesn't do that. It's probably a shortcoming. That's my
Ashwin?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're living in an interesting time right now where the customer understands that if I'm going to order from an off-premise for an off-premise order, it's going to cost me more. And so I think for the first time, the customer is seeing that that cheeseburger that I used to order all the time that cost me $10 doesn't cost me $10 anymore, depending on what channel I order through, when I order, and how I order. That presents an amazing opportunity for the restaurant industry to start testing price elasticity that has never existed before. So, to your question about what are the opportunities in revenue management, I mean, I think that's a tremendous opportunity. I think going back to what we said earlier about virtual brands presents another tremendous opportunity where there may be a fear in the restaurant industry about, well, how's the customer going to react if I start testing different pricing? Well, virtual brands opens the door to test under the veil of a different brand and protect your core brand at heart if that's a fear of yours. That's another thing that I think absolutely must be explored. But when you look at how restaurants have handled pricing over the years, it's been quite analog. They would literally walk around to other restaurants and write down what they're charging for things. And I think, those of us who are in the hotel industry understand that, there are available tools to see what my competition is doing. There are ways I can look at what Calibri Labs has been doing about, Cindy Estes Green's company about looking at the cost of things. There's an amazing company in the restaurant industry called Galley, which helps restaurants understand what's their inventory, what are the expiration dates, what are the cost of those items, so that all of that can be considered in how they're pricing things. So, there's a lot of good stuff going on. It's just but I empathize with restaurants around just wanting to, serve their customers and make great food and provide them with a great experience. And why do I now have to worry about all this stuff out there? Well, it's an unfortunate reality that it's time to start worrying about it.
And from a revenue management perspective, what gets me thinking is that we've got all these different distribution channels. They all have different margins. They all have different productivity. And I have a limited capacity, though it depends on what the capacity is. How do I choose the ones that are going to help me maximize my revenue? That's a classic revenue management decision. And the pricing goes into it. I see a lot of opportunity. And then one last thing, okay, because we've got a bunch of questions coming in. What are the key things that restaurant operators should remember? So Bill, the key takeaways, the 2 or 3 key takeaways.
3 takeaways. Get savvy about the role of intermediaries, about your brand. Second is get digital. Get digital. And the third is think about pricing and revenue management as opportunities to both increase revenue in the near term and increase revenue flow in the long run.
Ashwin?
I would say number one, again, to repeat, take as much advantage of those marketplaces and the merchandising available as you can. Number 2, again, virtual brands, consider that. I mean, I wanted to tell this quick story about Cali Comfort Barbecue, which had 1 unit in San Diego and was almost decimated during COVID, but they turned their business into a distribution hub for slow cooked barbecue throughout Southern California. So there's some great success stories out there. And the third thing I would say is just take calculated risks and experiment. This is the time to do it.
And my key takeaway, they're not the enemy. Don't treat them that way. It's an investment, and invest in digital. And again, don't be afraid. And so I hope this has proved valuable to you. And I've got a bunch of questions here. So let's start off here. This is one from this is from Michael Madison. Hi, Bill. Okay. Question is it delivery incremental business, or does it replace on-site dining? Ashwin, you want to take that one?
In full disclosure, this is my own opinion and I don't have statistics to back this up, but I think it's actually both. You do have, just like in the hotel industry, you have customers that, well, I don't really want to go looking at each restaurant's website and figuring out how to order delivery. I'm not sure where I want to order from. And so I'm just going to go through the options in a multi-option world, which is DoorDash or Uber Eats, and order that way because it's easier for me. In the Food on Demand conference, there was a statistic thrown out. I can't remember which brand it was. I think it was Starbucks, where they started to see that even through third-party intermediaries, they were seeing the same customer ordering 3 or 4 times in 1 month. And so I think the answer is yes, it is actually sometimes your own customer that's ordering through third parties. But there's little that you can do to change that until you start investing in the technology and getting to know the data of your customer. But then the other flip side of that is true, which is you have tremendous access to this marketplace and an ability to reach new customers that you didn't have before these third parties existed.
I have seen some stats on, I think it was from Sense 360, I'm not positive, where they went through and it's a mix, but the incremental business far outweighs the stuff where people who would have ordered from you anyway. And Bill, I assume we had similar things happen in the hotel industry.
Yes, and it's a parallel to what Ashwin mentioned, is that first of all, you are retaining the customer, and there's a value to retaining the customer going forward, whether it's your own customer or not, because you're building loyalty one stop, one experience at a time. The second thing is your customer invites other customers, whether they do it directly in a human way or whether they do it digitally with reviews. And so it creates incremental customers at the same time, simultaneously, and going forward. And that's why the whole argument about incremental leaves you a bit cold. Yeah, you might have gotten them otherwise. Yeah, you might lose them too. And so you have to take a look at the opportunity cost of loss as well.
And here's another question from me from a delivery service company's end, are there other values the company can bring to the restaurant except just marketing and delivery? Well, first of all, I think marketing and delivery are huge, but what other values can the delivery provider, the delivery service company provide? And Bill, let's, so with the on the OTA side, what other values were they providing? They obviously don't have to do the delivery, physical delivery, but what other values do they provide to the hotels?
Let me turn that question around, because I've been thinking about what value the delivery services, if you will, could provide to the consumer. One of the things is that they could provide a portfolio of services. So I could have wine delivered, I could have desserts delivered from another place, I could have the main meal delivered. At the same time, that same delivery service could provide coupons or loyalty to the same brands going forward. So they have the opportunity to not only deliver a portfolio of items, and as well as the timing of that, but they also have the opportunity to assist any individual supplier with future business. So they have those two capabilities: a portfolio for the customer of options, and the second thing they have is an opportunity for particularly for the suppliers to learn more about their customers, and hopefully that they would be doing that, providing that kind of information.
To me, the biggest thing is data. They can provide the restaurant.
Well, let's not forget the most obvious thing, which is delivery, right?
Well, yeah, that is delivery.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is big.
Restaurants didn't have to go out and hire their own delivery people during COVID and build up these networks of distribution. So I think we have to recognize that these third-party intermediaries stepped in at a moment when the industry desperately needed a way to get that food to the home, and they stepped up and they were already there, but they were able to fill that gap. I think Bill's point about providing multiple restaurant delivery is something very interesting, and we're starting to see more of that. I think more talk about it at least. The other thing is that within the restaurant industry, one of the things we're also starting to see are these coalitions. So there's a company called Hunger, there's another one called Go Loco, and it's interesting what they're doing is they're creating almost like unions. I don't want to use the wrong terminology, but they're creating groups of restaurants within certain geographies that are sharing delivery drivers, which is a brilliant idea, right? Maybe you can equate that to the room key of hotels. Let's hope it has a better future. But I think there are opportunities. I think the restaurants just have to really start to understand how all of this works, and then think outside the box of how to get creative and use these to their advantage.
And another question here from Bruno in Brazil. He talks about how Uber Eats has left the market, and we have another company, iFood, dominating in an almost 250 million market without competition. Woo. So
can I invest?
Can I invest? Yeah. But but what's going to happen there? I mean, Uber Eats if they've left. I'm not familiar with the Brazilian market, but I would assume that there's going to be someone else that's going to be hopping in there.
Well, look, let's talk about that for a second. I mean, if you look at Argentina, my understanding is that in Argentina is very similar. There's one dominant player down there, but that's unsustainable in my opinion. I mean, I think the restaurants are going to get smart about how to get that customer to either order direct, come pick it up. They can offer tremendous incentives. Now, I'm not familiar with the Brazil market, and maybe it's just too crazy and too far to go pick up my order. And so, but I think that somehow that's going to get balanced out.
I was going to raise a point about the partnerships and the competition, if you will. Thinking back about there was a time when all the chains were going to get together and create their own online travel company. What a disaster that was.
Twice.
Yeah, don't go there. I don't have the statistics, but don't go there.
Did not work well at all.
No.
And then, okay, and another,
you know what, Sherry, let me just say one thing. I think the world took a deep breath when Amazon went and bought Whole Foods. And that was something that I think a lot of people didn't expect. And so to your question about Brazil, I don't think the only other option is, will another competitor create a delivery distribution network? It's like, what other companies exist in Brazil, or what other entities exist in Brazil that have a distribution network that could leverage that to then get into the restaurant space? And maybe that's the way that that dominant monopoly will be disrupted.
But so, I mean, it's not going to continue like that. Something will happen.
Yeah.
Okay, another question from George. Is there an optimal number of brands served from a single ghost kitchen? And when do you reach diminishing returns? Well, I'll start off with that one. Well, that's one of those, it depends, but it depends on the capacity of the kitchen. It depends on the machines that you have in the kitchen. And also it depends on the other demands on the kitchen. I mean, do either one of you have any other thoughts on that one? I mean, I think it depends.
Yeah, I think it really does depend. And I've heard mixed stories about which ghost kitchen and which company, and the quality of the facilities, as well as the space you have and things like that. So I think it really does depend on each facility in terms of how much is too much.
So sorry, we can't be more definite on that one?
No, that was
from Gaurav. Given that now customers are more forgiving when it comes to higher prices or more frequent price increases due to inflation, do you think customers are now ready for dynamic pricing, or will they accept it more than they did a few years ago? That's a very interesting question. And there's been a lot of research on this in terms of how customers react to it. And I mean, in terms of people are okay with it, but it's got to be done in a certain way. And I mean, Bill and Ashwin, you want to jump in on this one?
Well, first of all, we're seeing dynamic pricing everywhere.
Yep.
AMC Theaters brought dynamic pricing to Batman tickets when they released the movie. We're starting to see Krispy Kreme donuts. The box of the donuts is now tied to the price of gasoline. I haven't heard of any customers revolting against this. And so, it's not just airlines and hotels anymore. Uber, I think, really legitimized dynamic pricing beyond hotels and airlines. And so I think it's a natural progression to start to see dynamic pricing um, into new industries. And I think the restaurant industry is ripe for it. The customer understands that there are inflationary pressures around labor cost and food cost. They're already experiencing it when they order from Uber or DoorDash and it's Saturday night and the delivery fee is suddenly $9 instead of $3 and people are paying $20 for something that they used to pay 10 for. And I think the customer has shown a propensity that they're open to a new form of pricing in the industry. I think it's worth
I
it.
think I agree, but I would also say that it's something on that for that Saturday night delivery. As a customer, I have a choice. I could say, no way, I'm not paying that. And when customers lose that control, that's where I think you have a problem. So I think that when you do dynamic pricing, you've got to be careful with the way you do it because you don't want it to backlash.
I think it is good, Sherry, because look, you made this point earlier. Restaurants do have a fixed capacity. So airlines have a certain number of seats to sell, hotels have a certain number of rooms to sell, and restaurants can only produce a certain amount of food within a certain time frame. There is a fixed capacity. So during peak periods, if the more price sensitive customers are incentivized to either order earlier or order later, then everybody wins in that scenario because the customer experience improves for the customers ordering during the peak times because the wait time goes down. And then those people who are interested in saving money can do so by ordering earlier or later.
Right. And Sherry, I think I've seen, shooting your horn, some great research that you've been able to produce. So I don't want to steal your thunder, but two items. The first is, yeah, we expect prices to go up. It's an expectation. That said, there ought to be reasons why I can have discounts off of those higher prices for reasons which benefit the supplier in providing those services, or alternatively, represent improving the convenience of the consumer to receive the dining experience when and where they want it. And so the understanding of the relationship between those prices from a benefit to the consumer and a benefit to the supplier is a win-win in, as we've talked about before, a digital marketplace. And the final part of that, I think, is that's the advantage of the digital marketplace is you can gather that information, price elasticity, pretty quickly in a digital dynamic pricing world.
I think I just want to make one more point here, which is that, and this is the reason we're calling it precision pricing, what we're doing, right? It's, we're not talking about let's change the price every 5 seconds. No. I don't think anybody wants that. And I don't think the customer will like that. And it's not good for the restaurant. But if you look at historically how restaurants have priced, there hasn't been a lot of data involved in those decisions. When that data is readily available, it just has to be collected, gathered, cleaned up, analyzed, and built in a way that an accurate forecast can be produced. And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity for the industry. It just has to be done in an intelligent way and in a way that doesn't upset the customer.
And I think that's the key. That's a great way of putting it, because what I love about pricing is that, yes, you could do the math, but the art of pricing is key with this. And we have one more question and then we'll wrap up. This is from John. Should we expect a nationwide chain to be taken out working through intermediaries, or maybe a fine dining chain? Woo! You think any of the major chains are going to get taken out?
By an intermediary or just
should we expect a nationwide chain to be taken out working through intermediaries?
Well,
I guess it'll hurt them.
That happening, but I do see ghost kitchens and virtual brands. I would venture to say that the third parties will be investing into virtual brands and ghost kitchens. I don't think they're going to be opening up storefronts across the street from restaurants. We did see that in the hotel industry, but I don't think we're going to see that here.
I mean, you're already seeing them. You're already seeing. I know this in Singapore, where the delivery companies have their own ghost kitchens and they do all that kind of stuff, and so they have their own virtual brand. So it's happening, and that's scary, right?
There's a lot of fear about Otter and the ownership there and what their real intentions are. providing, we saw this is an important point. You saw Booking.com try to provide booking engines and revenue management systems to hotels, and the hotels were like, whoa, red flag, Trojan horse. And I think the same is happening in the restaurant space now, where the restaurants are savvy enough to say, wait a minute, if you get all that data, what are you going to do with that? So
Right.
it's interesting.
I'd answer the question a bit differently. What I would say is the growth and significance of the brands, of the chains, and particularly of the chains who get it. And so though being the chains, need to be in survival and analytical roles to protect their position in the marketplace. And on my expectation is you'll see more chain growth, and you may see, as Ashwin alluded to, brands we hadn't thought about begin to evolve and become themselves, quote unquote, chains.
And so we need to wrap up now. And so first of all, I'd like to thank Bill and Ashwin for joining us. And I'd like to thank all of you in the audience. And just one last thing. So Ashwin, one thing people should remember from this. One thing.
I think it's keep an open mind, learn as much as you can, and I'm giving you 3 things, and don't be afraid to experiment.
Okay, Bill?
That was 3, so I get 2. All right.
Did I just get 1?
Well, I know it works that way.
That's all right.
I would say get digital and get savvy.
And I would say they're not the enemy. And at that point, thank you all. I hope this was useful to you, and the recording will be available. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to talk with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.